Welcome to Jay Sekulow Live. This is Jordan Sekulow. We are going to, again, get into this discussion that's so important as we prepare for the new year, which is the threats facing their country in 2021. And, at the ACLJ, we prepare for all outcomes where most of us are attorneys. We've got government affairs experts, of course, international affairs experts. And it's important that you always are prepared for the worst case scenarios, that you're prepared with the right information, that you know what the potential threats are, and where there could be, again, the most concern for our country, regardless of who is necessarily in the White House. And again, we're going to be talking about today, Dad, which is basically looking forward in 2021. Yep. And we've got a great expert who's been part of the ACLJ team even before the election and has been walking people through the election, but now even after the election too, these international threats.
Ric Grenell is the former acting director of national intelligence, former ambassador to Germany, is a senior advisor and special advisor to the ACLJ, especially as it relates to national security threats. But Rick, I think it's important for people to understand what you did. What does a DNI, Director of National Intelligence, do?
At DNI, we are looking at intelligence and trying to figure out what the truth is. We get a lot of information, a lot of raw intelligence that is coming in, and we're trying to assess what the truth is. And that's, I think, the most important thing, is to have a U.S. government that pushes truth, that pushes facts. And sometimes those are difficult, and sometimes that requires all of us to push the government to be more transparent. And transparency is our friend, and that's what we push for, because that's the clarity that we need, the facts that we need.
One of the things we do, Rick, of course, and you're aware of this, is that we have served Freedom of Information Act requests when we thought they were appropriate. We've just actually done one, too, on the situation with Eric Swalwell. We'll get into that after the break. But as Rick said, I want our listening audience to understand this. We don't just talk about the issues. We bring people like Ric Grenell as part of the team to work with us to figure out what is the right course of action to take, because we actually take action.
All right, welcome back to Jay Sekulow Live. It's Jordan Sekulow. This is a special broadcast. We want to bring in our senior special advisor, Ric Grenell, for the full hour for you. Usually, Rick is able to join for a segment or two. It's been a busy time, but he is a special advisor to the ACLJ, will provide that for us, and that is going to be critical because of the threats we face. And we just generally got into that in the first segment, Dad, but now we're going to start going through this kind of specifically. Yep. I know one that's kind of on the top of everyone's mind. Rick's been talking about it a lot too, but he's also said there's a lot more there than just Swalwell and what we've heard about Swalwell. And again, I mean, I think it is tip of the iceberg on China's threat to the U.S. We focus so much because of the focus the Democrats had on Russia. It was all, not that that's not a threat, by the way, and there's no threat from Russia. They did a major hack on the U.S. The last couple days. But China, so many on the left are afraid to call China a threat, or you're xenophobic if you call China a threat, because of money. Because of business, whether it's the film industry, whether it is the NBA, whether it is any major company, because of the business interests they have. So they look past the other way on the human rights violations, the imprisonment, mass incarceration, concentration camps of Muslims in China. And you would think the left would be all over that. No, they're not. No, I mean, and we've seen now they infiltrate congressional offices. That's no big deal, but they impeach presidents over phone calls that 35 people are on.
Yeah, so let's start with China, because I think it's made a lot of news because of Eric Swalwell, the and congressman. Yes, but the fact of the matter is that it goes much deeper than that. And Rick, what I wanted to get to first was, I mean, we talk about China, before we even get into the national security threat, you look at what they do to minorities in China. And a minority in China is defined as anybody that's not a member of the Communist Party. And also, and I need to say this, for religious minorities in China, and I've been to China. I have met with the lawyers that represent the underground churches. And I got to tell you something. It's unbelievably impressive people, unbelievably impressive spirit, but unbelievably oppressed.
And dangerous.
Where they literally will arrest the pastor in the middle of a sermon. And I went to one of the state churches, the government-sanctioned churches. Rick, I don't know if you've ever had this experience in your travels, but in China they have it's called the Three Self-Patriotic Church. Yep. And that's the Christian church. And the pastor's sermon, when it began, I'm listening to it translated, obviously, is a good sermon. The importance of the gospel, helping the poor, Jesus. I mean, it was good. But then in the middle of the sermon, he stops and says, but of course, none of this could happen without the government and without the party allowing us to be able to do these things. So he has to give this nod to the government. Then for what we would call the more typical, I mean, it's not they're evangelical churches, but it's a completely different cultural environment. They are worrying about, they're looking at the door to their houses or their office buildings where they're meeting to make sure the police aren't going to come in.
Because all being monitored.
Horrible human rights abusers. I mean, unbelievably. So it's like when we the Iranians, that's another one. They throw a pastor in jail, they throw gays off of buildings, and this administration is going to start negotiating. But let's focus first on China. Looking at the threat, I got that off my chest. China bothers me because we've done work there, Rick, for years. And these people go through it. It's horrific.
Yeah, look, I've spent 8 years at the UN dealing with the Chinese and the spying and the duplicity. You hit it right on the head, Jay. We've got a huge problem, a growing problem with China. And it's not just in politics, it's in academia. You and I have talked a lot about how our work can really penetrate into academia and the Chinese influence there at all of our schools. That's something that I'm looking forward to doing in the new year with you. Look, we as Christians right now are feeling the brunt of COVID, and we're feeling like we can't express ourselves and that we don't have the ability to go to church and worship the way that we want to. But imagine being in a place like China or in a place like Iran. This is where your religion is completely taken away from you. You have to hide it. You've got no religious freedom. We have to, as Christians in the United States, continue pushing our government to make a firm stance, to understand that we can't just look the other way on China's human rights abuses. We've seen what China secrecy and communist China secrecy can do to the entire economy of the world, not just our economy, but every single economy around the world has been impacted by COVID-19. The secrecy of the communist Chinese ways is why we are in this dilemma. They were not honest with us up front, and we all know because the U.S. intelligence agencies collectively sent out a statement, a rare statement, saying that China is where COVID-19 originated. They should have been much more honest with the world, with the UN, with WHO, with the United States, and all countries to say what they were dealing with. They knew it when they shut down all of these flights from Wuhan to other cities in China, but allowed flights to go from Wuhan to other parts of the world. They knew exactly what they were doing, and this is what we're dealing with. China is a crisis for the United States. We must really push our government, and in this next year, it's going to really be incumbent upon Christians and activists to make very clear that we cannot have a country like China that is doing all sorts of business with American companies, systematically having human rights violations and abuses. That is just unacceptable. And I think that we're going to have to get a louder voice to make clear that working with China and looking the other way is unacceptable.
And Rick, I mean, we've seen this now with the Swalwell matter, which you've talked about a lot, I know, but for our audience, I mean, you said this is it's like the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more there, and then you see the Nancy Pelosi, they're just like shrugging their shoulders. Yeah, we knew about it, but that happened, and yet they're put on the Intel committee. And I mean, that's just one example of one congressman that has access to a lot of classified information, was calling the president a Russian agent throughout this time period. So I think he deserves all the criticism he's getting now because of the role he played in just trying to disparage President Trump and calling him basically, this agent of an outside force, while he's got this relationship with a Chinese spy, puts the intern in who was a bundler somehow. I mean, I remember interning on Capitol Hill. I cannot bundle donations for the congressman I interned for when I was there. But I mean, it's the idea that, and it goes to Hunter Biden too, the shrugging of the shoulders. Now they're starting to pick up some on Hunter Biden. But remember, on the election, Rick, the first debate, Joe Biden called the president a liar. The media ran with it. And now the headlines are about how Hunter Biden was doing this business. I mean, now the same people who ran with it, yeah, the president is lying about Hunter Biden, are writing stories about Hunter Biden's Chinese business dealings.
Look, we have a problem in the intel community because the Russia team is highly political and very quick to make judgments on raw intelligence. The China team is completely the opposite. They are judicious. They're slow. They're not political. They want to wait for raw intelligence to be assessed and have a collective assessment. The Russia team leaks out little pieces of the raw intelligence before it's actually collectively thought through and assessed. This is a real problem because what's happening now, because of this problem in the intel community, we've seen Democrats completely downplay the China threat. And that plays right into the COVID-19 problem. Look what we've just experienced through this last election period. Yep. We had a whole bunch of Democrats mocking the threat from China and really giving Beijing's line. I think that we've got to get to the bottom of this and understand why are so many Democrats, and let's be honest, several of them in the San Francisco area are all taking the Beijing line, downplaying the Chinese threat. And they're doing it not just on the supply chain issue or engagement with China, but on COVID, on the election threat. It just seems to be on every issue. What China wants is what Democrats keep saying, which is look over there and look at Russia.
We'll be right back with more with Ric Grenell talking about these threats to the U.S. and potential threats in 2021. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to Jay Sekulow Live. This is Jordan Sekulow. Ric Grenell, our special advisor to the ACLJ, is joining us talking about the potential threats and ongoing threats to the U.S. in 2021. And who better to talk about it than a former acting director of national intelligence, former ambassador to Germany, someone who spent almost a decade at the United Nations dealing with these countries, dealing with the intel, dealing with the classified information, probably the overwhelming amount of countries that would like to harm the U.S. and the ones that actually have the potential to do it. And so we talked about a couple of the big players. We talked about China. They have the potential to do it. Russia, they show that they do it through hacking.
Russia in a minute. Yeah.
But they've shown through just recently, a few days ago, the hacking that they can do on major businesses on our intel committee. But then there's the countries that want to do more to harm us too. That's like the Irans. They may not be as sophisticated yet as a China or Russia,
the populace,
but there's in some ways more dangerous because of the extremism that fuels their government instead of whether it's money that fuels the Chinese government.
And the ability to destabilize an entire region.
Right.
Where the Chinese will be cautious about destabilizing the region because they're such a big part of the region. The Iranians, on the other hand, and we know we have an office in Jerusalem, of course, but we have done work on the Iran issue, the Iranian issue, and Iran, the approach to Iran under the Trump administration was isolate, build coalitions around them that support Israel and Israel supporting them, UAE, Morocco, Bahrain, Sudan. I mean, more coming. Change the whole dynamic. Now, I always start with the fundamental abuse of a society. Here's the fundamental abuse of the Iranian society. Persians are great people, really great people, great history. I mean, tremendous history, just really great people. We know a lot of them. But let me tell you what you don't have in Iran. Diversity of any kind. Let's start with religious diversity. You're a pastor in Iran, good chance you'll spend 6 to 12 years in prison once or twice in your ministry. If you're an American pastor, by the way, and you happen to be in Iran or a dual citizen of Iran, guess what you get? You can get life imprisonment at Evin Prison. That's not pretend, that's real. Gays and lesbians, they throw them off of buildings. Christian pastors, they have shot them. Now, that's Iran. Now, this president has isolated Iran and crippled them economically. As I look looking for, one of the things that grieves me most about the election, Rick, was the reshaping of the Middle East that I know you were a part of, that we helped on the outside on, that was really coming together. And now it's the old guard back in, it's Obama 2.0, and you know with Iran what they're going to be doing.
Yeah, look, let's not forget Kosovo and Serbia with their new historic agreements with Israel as well.
Right.
Look, I'm very concerned about the engagement with Iran. Let's be very clear now. There is this idea that Joe Biden has pushed. It's called consensus. Now, it sounds like a really nice word, but consensus just means that the Europeans or the UN Security Council, 14 other countries, get to water down U.S. policy and decide what we do. So instead of having a potent U.S. policy that's America first, you have to go to all these other countries and say, well, what do you guys think that we should do? And it's the lowest common denominator of a policy. And that's what they call consensus. And they've tried to build up this idea of consensus. Now, look, as a diplomat, I love consensus if it's going to be something that the United States is going to improve our security upon. We need to be able to be very firm about forming alliances around our policy, not letting others water down our policy. And that's where we're going with Iran, is that the Europeans want engagement. They want to be able to say, if we just engage a little more with Iran and maybe do some trading, that the regime and the mullahs will just suddenly see the light of day, and they will start moving towards the rule of law, capitalism, and greater forms of democracy. Now, let's look at what we've tried with China. 20 years ago, we did that. We thought, let's engage with China. Let's put them into the WTO, the World Trade Organization. Let's see if engagement would actually work. I'm all for engagement. President Trump has tried engagement with the North Koreans. But at some point, you have to be smart about your engagement to have a benchmark and to say, did our engagement work? I think that we need to face the music, and we should have faced the music about 15 years ago, that trying to get greater cooperation with China by getting them into the WTO didn't work. We have seen human rights abuses get worse. Look at Hong Kong. Look at our companies that have their technology stolen. WTO has not only failed to stop the theft of Chinese of U.S. intelligence and U.S. Technology, but it's also allowed the Chinese to be able to pretend like they're part of the international community working in cooperation when they have absolutely come at us in every possible way. This is where we're going with Iran. This is what the Biden team wants. They're going to start talking about consensus and engagement on Iran, and we need to stand firm against it.
I always like giving people hope, because the one thing I don't want is people who are just going to say, oh, this is horrible, this is terrible. We have to take concrete action, which is, now, if the Senate stays conservative, stays Republican, you're going to have a better chance on some of these. But foreign policy issues, as you know, because you've dealt with them, the president has a lot of authority. How do we tell our folks that are millions listening to us right now, hundreds of thousands watching us, how do we engage when an administration is taking contrary positions?
Look, I believe that transparency is important. So we're going to have to push the administration, and maybe that means going to court and taking people all the way to the end to say, you must show us or stop doing something that you're doing. So we need legal challenges. And I love the fact that we have smart people sitting around a table to figure out, what are we going to do to push transparency, to fight in court legally. This is why we have a constitutional rule of law that allows people like you and I and the Trump campaign or anyone to petition the courts and to bring your case to an independent judiciary when you feel wronged. You got to have representatives. If you don't have representatives and people fighting for you, then your voice is lost. And that's what we want to do, is be able to be transparent and fight in court where needed.
I want to talk about Europe too, because you were the U.S. ambassador to Germany. Germany has got the biggest economy in Europe. We've seen the UK leave the Euro. I mean, it's just been an interesting time. That again, America's, it was rightfully so, with our election, with COVID, with a lot of things, we weren't paying as close attention to. But your time in Germany as well, these are supposed to be our top allies. I know in a lot of matters, it's probably no question they are, but it seemed to be getting very hostile because they just didn't like our approach, which I think you've rightfully said is that it's not all about consensus under the Trump administration. I worry we're going to go back to that if it's the Biden administration. But, people, I think also we need to get kind of up to speed on what is happening in Europe right now, or Western Europe and our allies.
Yeah. So first of all, let's remember when we talk about Europe, or specifically Germany, there are three concepts. They're the German people, there's German businesses, and there's the German government. And I think it's really important to not include all of them in how we're describing Germany. And let me give you an example. Great story. President Trump meeting with Chancellor Merkel. They were meeting one-on-one, but we say one-on-one, but there's really like four other people in the room on each side listening and talking. And so I'm there listening, and President Trump just hones right in with the chancellor and says, look, I don't blame you for wanting to buy cheap Russian gas. And I don't blame you for ignoring the obligations at NATO. You don't want to pay that much for a military because you've got, 34,000 American troops there. I don't blame you. But you have to understand that you now are dealing with somebody who wants America first, just like you want Germany first. We recognize in our policy that countries are going to seek what's best for them. So in Germany, there's a Germany first economic model. In France, there's a France first economic model. Brexit happened because the UK wanted to put themselves first. And so we should be very clear that this is the standard, that Donald Trump pushing America first is only doing what every other country does. But the difference is that the people, many people in Germany, for instance, many Germans love it. They love when Germany is put forward first. They do think that Germany should have a working military. They do think that Germany should spend money on its own people and abide by the rules. But I think that for too long, we've had consecutive U.S. governments and administrations that have allowed the Europeans to act out in their own way to put themselves first and to demand or expect that the United States is just going to continue not putting itself first, that we're going to somehow take care of the world. We see it at the UN all the time. I've never been in a diplomatic meeting, a diplomatic conversation where the other side doesn't ask the United States for a long list of things that they want us to do. And every one of those things that they ask us to do are always going to benefit them. That's part of diplomacy. And we're the only country in the world that gets in trouble when it's our turn and we say, well, this is what we'd like you to do because it's going to benefit us. And so I think that that's where we're going to head in this next administration, is there's going to be a weakness towards expecting the Europeans to go back to wanting America to pay, wanting America to always be the leader, and that they will get to continue, European countries will get to continue putting themselves first.
If you could just tell our audience how important it is to engage these international bodies, even some that you just don't like the way they operate, but to have a presence there is so important to engage it.
Look, when we have a meeting at the UN or at The Hague or some international multilateral setting, countries always show up to talk. And it's incredibly important to have outsiders, NGOs, third-party validators, as we call them, to have other voices. Because otherwise, Europeans or Arab countries are just going to say, well, of course the United States feels that way. But they look around the room and they say, nobody else is here saying it. There's no support for them. I think sometimes we get caught up in diplomacy looking at the placards in the room. And if it's just the United States, and then on the other side, it's some random, other country that's up against us, it looks like it's just one voice versus one voice. And what we have to be able to do is represent the truth and show that we have a whole bunch of support. So having ACLJ in the room, having voices to say, look, we represent, X number of Christians around the world, or we are here to give voice to this situation. The outside perspective in those settings is incredibly important to sway the rest of the body, that it's not just a one-on-one conversation.
Well, I appreciate it, Rick. And it's exactly what we do every single day here in the United States and literally around the globe.